I'm gonna go over like the characters, because there are characters in here, right? So it says starring Kageyama, Tobio, Sitter, Krasna, 15, obviously. Then we have YNLN, or it says YLNYN, so I'm guessing your last name and then your name. Singles champion Kageyama, 15. Placeholder GIF, the placeholder, there's a GIF, like the GIFs. I got Hinata Shoyo, Wing Spiker Krasno, 15. Yeah, Chloe. Nishinoya Yu, Libro Krasno, 16. Oh, he's so adorable in this GIF. Sugawara Koshi, Setter Krasno, 17. Formerly doubles champion Kageyama. Sakurai Natsumi, doubles champion Kageyama, 15. Disclaimer: tennis scoring basically works in that the first 2 points you score are 15 each, and the one after is 10, and then it's game. Love means 0 points. Wait, what? For example, love 15, love 30, love 40. Game. A set is first to 6 games, so the score could be 6-2 or something similar. Kageyama is a junior and senior school I meet up with, this is the author. Kageyama is a junior and senior school I made up with Miyagai's best school tennis club. Warnings: this story will contain blood, angst, Kags being a little mean hoe, swearing, and all the rest of it. They also made YN right-handed just for the sake of the story, so if you are left-handed, I'm sorry, but we're gonna be reading in right hand. So yeah, the author says, I'm so excited for this book. Please stay with me. I love every single one of you, beautiful readers, and Jazzy. So I'm guessing that's her name, or their name. But yeah, like I said. YN, come on, get forward. The 12-year-old girl propped her hands on her hips, her tennis racket dangling from the fingers of her right hand as she cast a teasing glance toward her superior. Are you really gonna full-on coach me, Suga? She raised an eyebrow. You're only 2 years older than me? 3. The silver-haired boy protested, kicking the back of his shoes with his racket string with a reluctant grin on his face. Come on, just come in a little earlier and slice the ball instead of putting too much spin on it, or it'll just go out. Suga was always smiling, but when YN recorrected her forehand stroked properly, sending the yellow ball spiraling to the baseline, he couldn't quite muster a proper grin. She dropped her racket by the sideline, sipping briefly from her water bottle as she rounded the net to the side her senpai stood on. Suga, what's up? He sighed, not quite able to look her in the eyes. YN, I'm not staying at Kageyama. I'm going to Karasuno. Volleyball? She incredulously inquired, folding her arms. The third-year middle schooler looked genuinely hurt, and he pushed away the wheeled basket of tennis balls to focus all his attention on the younger girl. I'm really sorry, YN. I didn't mean to hurt or ditch you. Oh, that's what you're worried about? She gave a little chuckle. Suga, I'm not stopping you from going to Karasuno. You haven't been playing like yourself. Yokoyama said so. He chuckled at the mention of his doubles partner, but sobered once again at the first year's earlier words. You're right. I just don't think I like to play tennis anymore. And maybe I'll do better in volleyball. I always have in PE. Shut up. YN rolled her eyes, reaching out and jokingly slapping him. Honestly, though, if you're gonna quit... Sugawara took a sharp breath at the sudden emotion that laced through YN's words as she began to speak louder. You need to be better at the second thing. Do you hear me, Suga? You need to be the best if you're just going to quit, damn it. He took a step back as Hwayen's hands curled into fists, and this girl, who was so much younger than him, yelled, "If you're gonna leave me behind, then you'd better be good." The last exclamation rang out across Kageyama's junior tennis courts, echoing slightly in the otherwise silence. "Hwayen, She turned away from him, evidently hurt that her mentor and superior was going to quit so easily and leave her behind. "Do your best, Sugawara-senpai." The words were cold, and there was an undertone of farewell in them. Sugawara was smart enough to tell when he was being blocked out, and he picked his racket from the floor and hurried off the court as Hwayen reached for a ball from the basket, throwing it up to serve. Suddenly captured by the motion, the third year watched a last time as Hwayen bent her knees, her right arm folded behind her with a racket securely ready to hit the ball as her left hand was raised, just beneath the ball she'd tossed. Sugawara could tell from the angle of the toss that the serve would be perfect, even before she hit it, but as Hwayen leapt into the air and smashed her racket downward, an involuntary squeak of awe slipped out of him as the first year hit the perfect ace that landed deep and bounced high. It was undoubtedly the best serve she'd ever hit in her life, but she turned to the side to wipe a tear that at some point had accidentally slipped out, picking up another ball from the basket and throwing it up again, and again, and again. She struggled not to cry, even when Sugawara was long gone, and guilt overwhelmed her as well as anger and sadness. Still, she tossed up ball after ball, hitting serve after serve, promising herself one thing: "I'm going to become the greatest player that Kageyama has ever seen. I'm going to surpass Suga." Present day. "An away game?" Hwayen moaned, sliding down the wall so she was half hanging off the bench she sat on. "Oh man, I always play the best over here." "Don't be so dramatic." Sakurai Natsumi, her doubles partner, admonished, administering a quick whack to the back of Hwayen's hair-colored head. "It's at that school with the crazy good courts. Krasno?" Hwayen froze at the mention of that school as she repeated, "Krasno? Yeah, do you know it?" She turned away from Natsumi, hiding her face as she double-checked that they had a fresh can of balls. "It's nothing to worry about, Sumi." "That wasn't my question," the blonde girl noted, crossing her arms over the straps of her racket bag. "Do you know Krasno?" "It's where Suga went," Hwayen finally admitted after a lengthy pause. "But don't worry about it, because it's not like we're playing him. He doesn't even do tennis anymore." Natsumi raised an eyebrow at the weighted response and obvious pain in the words, but the hair-color-haired girl didn't give her a chance to drill for more information as the public bus screeched to a halt outside the Krasno gates, and the girls hopped out, along with two other members of their team, Hayashi and Hashimoto. "This place is pretty big," Hwayen admitted, throwing and catching an old tennis ball absent-mindedly. "Where are the courts, Sumi?" "Next to the volleyball gym," she declared, examining a map plastered on the side of the building. Rolling her eyes and muttering a curse under her breath, Hwayen yelled, "Let's warm up and run," and began to lead the way to the gym and courts. Arriving at the blue asphalt courts, Hwayen couldn't resist a peek inside the gym, and what she saw made her eyes widen. She'd studied a little volleyball when she was in her first year of middle school, trying to find out what about it was so appealing that someone would ditch an invitation to the best tennis school in the prefecture for it. On the court, there was a tall, black-haired boy, fairly attractive if she was to be honest, tossing up sets. But he wasn't Sugawara. Was he gone? Chapter 1. That's game, Hwayeon called, watching her opponent's ball fly way out, at least a foot behind the baseline. 6-1, right? The other girl barely inclined her head, clear lines of anger and frustration wrinkling her face as she tapped her racket with Hwayeon's at the net as a way of shaking hands, stalking away. You're not playing your best. What? She turned at Natsumi's words, dropping her racket on the bench by the side of the court and tossing and crossing her arms at the seated girl. She got 1 game off of me. What do you mean I'm not doing my best? I didn't say you weren't doing well. Natsumi continued to reason calmly, offering Hwayeon a water bottle. But you're not playing your best. You could hit harder and use more tactics. Instead, I can see you playing to the bare minimum. Hwayeon sighed, caught out in the knowledge that her friend was right. I think I've just been a little preoccupied. Sugawara? The name was said with a teasing smirk, and the other girl had to give a loud groan. For the last time, Sumi, I never had a crush on him. He's definitely not the most attractive member on the team he's on. Oh, who is? But I looked up to him like a teacher, a friend, and not knowing whether he'd just given up on volleyball too and wasted an opportunity at Kageyama. Natsumi nodded understandingly as she stood, bouncing a ball into the asphalt with her racket repeatedly in preparation for the next match. I can see what you mean, but now's not the time to focus on that. We're on. Hwayeon frowned at the other end of the court, where the 2 girls dressed in orange and black uniforms stepped toward the net. Oh shit, it's doubles now, isn't it? Correct. The blonde grinned, flicking a ball up into her hands with her shoe and racket. Strolling to meet the Karasuno players. I know it's not your favorite, but hurry up. Hwayeon noticed the girl she'd beaten a couple of minutes earlier standing next to a taller doubles partner as she raced up to the net, an uneager feeling making her muscles tense up. Doubles matches were her least favorite part of tennis. She hated the feeling of having to rely on someone else to win or covering their mistakes. Come to think of it, she hated relying on people in anything, and she felt that, in tennis, you only needed one person to win. Hwayeon! She shook herself from the contemplative reverie and turned to Natsumi, who pointed at the back of the court and tossed a ball to the hair-colored haired girl, who barely caught it. Your serve, partner. Let's move. Stifling a groan, Hwayeon moved to the back of the court, bouncing the ball a couple of times before throwing it up and jumping, her racket perfectly positioned to smash an ace of a serve. Shit. The toss had been a little low, and she was forced to whack the ball at an awkward angle, and it soared past the girl she'd defeated earlier, well out. This is the part I hate of doubles, she thought, apologizing to Natsumi, the part where you have to trust other people and they rely on you. Fault 1! The Krasno girls called, and Hwayeon tossed up another ball, refraining from a jump serve to guarantee that she'd get the point. If this game turned out like almost every other doubles match she'd ever played, she was in trouble. 7-5, good game. Hwayeon let a tiny bit of relief slip through her unconcerned facade as she tapped rackets with the 2 Krasno girls, who gave a sportsmanlike smile as they retreated to their team's bench with another loss. However, Any of her positive emotion vanished when Natsumi wheeled on her, and she knew she was in for it. Come on, YN, you're literally the best tennis player in all of Kageyama, and you're playing doubles like this? She stayed silent as the blonde began to rant, reaching for water and the score sheet as her annoyed tirade filled the air. Currently, Kageyama was winning at 5-1, but Karasuno could draw that into a tie in the final 4 single matches if they tried. The orange and black team wasn't exactly weak, and if Kageyama faltered, then they'd embarrassingly suffer a loss as the greatest tennis school to one that everyone knew for volleyball. I'm sorry, YN finally offered as Natsumi tired, resting on the bench and clenching her water bottle. You know, I don't... Yes, I know you don't play doubles well. Natsumi snapped and YN flinched, recognizing the easily frustrated side that she had perhaps provoked too often with too many losses. But you need to get your game up. If we don't stay at the top of the draw ladder, then we can kiss a final and successful season goodbye. Wincing, YN nodded, trailing her finger down the score sheet again to seek her next opponent, some third-year girl called Nishinoya. She raised her head to watch as a girl with dark brown hair and a dyed streak tucked just behind her ear walk onto the court, discarding her black racket at her team's bench as she bent over their copy of the score sheet. Yumi, Yumi! YN's attention was captured by a boy's voice calling, and both she and the girl, Nishinoya Yumi, turned to look at who had made the loud cry. The boy looked plenty similar to her, just a little younger, so they must have been younger brother and older sister. However, it was the people standing on either side of this boy who really drew YN's eye, and she let out an involuntary gasp. Standing next to the short boy who waved energetically at his sister, who yelled back something along the lines of, "Shut the fuck up, you, I'm trying to play," were at least a dozen other boys, all dressed in orange and black, the colors of Karasuno. YN noticed the tall, black-haired boy she'd seen earlier first, but her eyes then trailed sideways to look at someone he was talking to, receiving advice from. Someone with a volleyball in his hands. Someone with painfully familiar silver hair and warm brown eyes, who gave a timid wave to the Kageyama singles champion, who just stood, dumbfounded, as she looked up at the spectators. No way. Chapter 3. We did it! YN and Natsumi cheered happily, running to consult the score sheet. 7 sets for Kageyama to Karasuno's 3 sets. No kidding when Yumi said they were strong, Sugawara remarked as the volleyball club watched the girls pack up their bags and shake hands. That was a wipeout. Come on, let's go down and greet them, Nishinoya suggested, already halfway to the tennis teams. The rest of the club had no choice but to follow their hyperactive libero, trotting onto the courts to where Nishinoya had already stood next to his sister. Yumi was a full head taller than Yu, but they appeared to have a good relationship, from what everyone could tell as brother hugged sister. Better luck next time, Yumi. That was a tough opponent. The brunette laughed, tugging on her dyed strand and her brother's. Thanks for coming, Yu. Meanwhile, Hinata raced onto the court with an excited grin, so pleased to meet such talented and quick players, practically bouncing with energy and dragging Kageyama along behind him. "Oi, where are we going?" The setter was interrupted as Hinata tapped the girl who'd beaten Yumi on the shoulder. She turned around, somewhat startled to be faced with two total strangers. "I'm Hinata Shoyo," the orange-haired boy practically cheered. "Your shots are awesome! The ball goes like whoosh, and then bam, and then you stack it down like swish!" Wayan couldn't help but laugh at this overly animated boy as she stuck her hand out to shake his. Wayan, your school can actually play well for one that specializes in volleyball." "This is Kageyama." Hinata pointed at the boy beside him after giving Wayan a very enthusiastic handshake. "He thinks you're a good player too." "No, I do. Hinata, you dumbass." She giggled as the two boys began to fight, a blush reddening Kageyama's cheeks. "Kageyama. So that was the name of the talented boy who'd been talking to you, Sugawara." The name slipped out from her lips unbidden as the boy in question came up to the first years. "Why, Ellen, you played well, but I could tell you were holding back." Her hands clenched into fists. 5 minutes back after 3 years, and the first thing you say is an insult. "Sugawara-senpai, is Wayan your ex-girlfriend?" Wayan choked on nothing at Hinata's words, noting a curious flash of emotion in the robotic Kageyama's eyes as he bent over and coughed. "No!" Suga exclaimed, "but she's someone that I owe a great deal of explanation and an apology to." "You need to be the best if you're just going to quit, damn it!" "Hey!" The Nishinoya siblings jogged up just then, breaking the tension as Yumi flashed a smile to Wayan and Natsumi, who had joined the small group at the approach of more Krasna players, tennis and volleyball alike. "We're going to Sakanoshida Market where the volleyball coach works. You're welcome to come with us," Yumi offered the Kageyama players. Before Natsumi could call over Hayashi and Hashimoto to make a decision, Wayan locked eyes with Sugawara and replied, "It's all right, I'd rather not." Before she could turn away, a pale hand latched onto her own, stilling her in her tracks. "Please don't be mad at me, Wayan. Please, just let me explain." If she was honest, after 3 years of bitterly holding on, she was ready to forgive Sugawara. After all, she couldn't make a choice on where he went to high school for him. Maybe all this time, all she needed was an explanation of why, and he evidently seemed more than ready to provide one. "Okay," she gave in hesitantly, shooting a sideward glance at Natsumi. "Actually, Yashi, Hashi, and I were gonna go back to Kageyama," the blonde admitted, already packing her racket away. There was a lingering coldness in her gaze, as though she still wasn't forgiving Wayan for her poor performance in the doubles. As she tilted her head downwards and stared at the ground, struggling not to let the sudden tears escape, a hand landed on her shoulder, pulling her attention back upwards. "Come on, you can come with us," said Kageyama Tobio. A volleyball bouncing loudly off the ground as the black-haired setter looked behind him to find that no one was there. Not one of his teammates had been there for him as Kageyama pivoted to stare at the entirely empty court. Like a worst nightmare come true, he found the gazes of the other members of Kirikawa Daiichi. They stood off to the side of the court, arms folded and eyes angry, leaving him behind, leaving him alone. On the courts, surrounded by emptiness, as a shrill, umpire's whistle filled the air, as they pulled him from the white boundaries of the only place he felt at home, with an insatiable, uncertain emotion breaking his heart in two. Sadness. and the feeling that after being left behind by so many people, he would never play in a team quite the same way again. Hwaein had been left behind too many times to count after the first loss of Sugawara. Partner after partner uninterested in playing with a singles champion who did so poorly in doubles. Like a solitary king, alone on their throne, with no one to rule at their side. She could see the very same emotion in the dark blue depths of Kageyama's eyes. The same story reflected back at her. He'd been left alone as well. Some unspoken understanding reflected between the two of them as Hwaein nodded, allowing herself to be pulled away with the Karasuno boys, plus Yumi, who laughed happily as a group, talking over one another and throwing a volleyball over their heads. Hwaein and Kageyama walked side by side in silence, her racket bag slung over her shoulder in the distance between them. Yet the quietness of each other's company wasn't uncomfortable or unpleasant. It was surprisingly easy to just be in the presence of someone just like you. As they reached the store to be yelled at by a middle-aged blonde man for stealing my volleyballs and fucking rampaging my store, what the fuck do you think you're doing? Hwaein and Kageyama stood facing each other outside the doors in which the chaos reigned. Forcing a lilt of smile to her lips, Hwaein asked, "Can I buy you something?" "Hey," Daichi remarked to Sugawara and Azumane, the three third-years watching the younger students romped about. "Kageyama's got a friend, finally." Sugawara turned to look at Hwaein standing by the setter's side, each of them sipping cartons of milk and talking quietly. "I think he'll be good for her. They're actually very similar people in different sports and different lives." "You know, the first word she said around him was love, right?" Azumane recalled, scratching the beginnings of the beard on his chin. Just as he was looking at her. Can't be a coincidence. All three boys laughed loudly, contently observing as the two lonely champions slowly began to smile. Who knows? Maybe something good will happen this year. Chapter 4. Hwaein found herself spending huge amounts of time at Karasuno over the following weeks. With her only playing matches on Saturdays and Sundays as a round-robin tournament format, she had plenty of time to train with her teammates that she could have been using. And yet, she found herself practicing with Nishinoya Yumi and her team, consisting of a girl named Sawamura, whose brother was the volleyball captain, and a pair of twins named Ami and Asa. The Karasuno girls were incredibly nice, and though they may not have had the pure power and talent that Hwaein had, they definitely had some things to teach her about strategy and endurance. However, tennis wasn't the only thing they spent long afternoons doing at Karasuno. As soon as they wrapped up at 5 or 6 p.m., the 5 girls ran down to the volleyball courts to watch the boys play, sometimes even learning technique or plays from them. Hwaein had yet to join in on the volleyball playing, but she found it useful to watch the strategy of a different sport, observing how it may help her in her own. One night, when everyone else had packed up and Hwaein was ready to walk to the bus stop with Karasuno's 2 managers and the tennis girls, she swore aloud, slapping a hand to her head and pulling painfully on her hair-colored hair. Shit, I forgot my racket at the gym. Want us to wait for you? Shimizu, the third-year volleyball club manager, asked calmly, her voice never wavering from its usual calm tone. No. Hwaeun waved her hand with a faked smile. I'll be fine. Go on ahead. Though the remaining girls expressed their concerns for the eye-colored-eyed girl, she ran back to the gym before they could protest. Hwaeun had expected the building to be scarily dark and empty as it was supposed to be, given that it was well after 8 p.m., but, to her surprise, when the gym came back into her sights, it was aglow with lights and echoing with the noise of balls hitting the polished floors. Only 2 people would still be practicing after they were supposed to have stopped. Hey, Kageyama, Hinata? Hwaeun greeted casually as she slid open the door. Did you guys see my racket? Hinata let out a shrill, guilty scream, freezing in the middle of a spike and yelling when the ball landed on his head as he dropped to land on the floor. Oh, violin, Kageyama remarked calmly, giving a tiny wave of his hand. I was gonna give it back to you tomorrow. You didn't need to come back. Hwaeun flushed at the casual ease at which he made his statement. She really couldn't figure this setter out. Well, thanks anyway. He handed her black and favorite-colored racket back, walking away to gather up the fallen balls. It's pretty dark. You shouldn't walk back alone. Do you need me to walk you to the bus stop? Once again, the tennis player marveled at his ability to say things in such a straightforward, stiff-as-a-board way, but she was grateful for his offer. No matter how low the crime rate was in all of Miyagi, it was still risky for a teenage girl to walk home alone at night. Thank you, she accepted gracefully, bending to pick up a ball and throwing it back into the basket. I'll wait for you to be ready. Wait, violin! Hinata squeaked, rubbing his head and popping up to his feet. I want to see something. She stopped in her tracks to the door, dropping her racket in its case off her shoulder. Yes? You're an incredible server in tennis, right? Not even giving her time to respond, the short boy continued. Can you do a volleyball serve? Kageyama folded his arms. Don't say stupid things, Hinata. Serving is one of the hardest parts of volleyball, especially jumping and run serves. Hwaeun raised an eyebrow, stalking to the ball basket and snatching one from it. Bet. What? The black-haired setter cut himself off as she ran to the baseline, taking one breath in before tossing the ball up with her left hand. She took a tiny step forward, bending her knees and jumping with all her might as she smacked the ball downwards, smirking with satisfaction as the ball bounced easily in with a resounding boom. That satisfaction from absolutely decimating the ball. So, this is why people play volleyball. Kageyama ruined the odd silence. It's called a jump and run serve, while you were meant to run. Hinata jumped up to pound his fist into the taller boy's head. Shut the fuck up and don't be mean to your girlfriend that way, Kageyama. That serve is totally awesome. Hwaeun, please teach me. Wait, what? She's not my girlfriend. Hwaeun cut off Kageyama with a roll of her eyes. He's just teasing you, Kags. We've only known each other for a month? Anyway, can we pack up now? Kags? The setter whispered to himself with evident confusion. Is that an abbreviation, or it's a nickname, you dumbass? Hinata growled, his arms stuffed with 3 balls. Hurry up, Violin won't wait for us long. In no time, the 3 teenagers had packed up the gym and set out for the little village's bus stop, talking animatedly. When are your finals? Hinata asked, the wheels of his bicycle clicking as they walked slowly. Well, In this format of competition, with so many schools, we have a semi with the top 4 teams, 1v4 and 2v3, and then a final from there. Wyan explained, ticking them off on her fingers. My semi is tomorrow morning, and we're playing the 4th team, Jozenji. Krasno's in 2nd, so maybe we'll play them in the Hold on. Kageyama interrupted, grabbing Wyan's forearm. She jerked to a stop, looking up into his deep eyes inquisitively. Your semifinal was tomorrow, and you let Hinata keep you waiting with us? He gesticulated wildly, almost forgetting he was still holding on to the girl. You idiot! You need to get home and sleep. As if you ever do that, Kageyama. The spiker protested, rolling his eyes and turning off onto a side road. Good luck for your semi, Wyan. Oh, thanks, Wyan called, waving after the disappearing orange head. And then it was just her and Kageyama, in the comfortable silence they were somehow always able to settle into, with only a few more meters until the bus stop. I mean it, Wyan. He nudged her shoulder in a rare display of one of his jokes. Get some sleep. Sure, Mom. She giggled, saluting with a smirk as she hopped on the bus, pulling up to the curb. See you later, Kags. He barked out a laugh as she disappeared, shaking his head at her and her often silly jokes. This Wyan was a completely different girl to the one broken by rejection. But neither of their lonely trials were over. Chapter 5. Wyan, congratulations! The Krasno boys cheered as Wyan ran into the volleyball gym. She blinked slowly. How did you guys know we won? Nishinoya held up his phone. Yumi texted. Her match finished before yours, and she's through the finals too. Wyan grinned, a smile that was tired and yet pleased, making her face light up wonderfully with beauty and emotion. I look forward to it. How are your matches and plays? The team shared a sly look, and Hinata and Nishinoya looked particularly proud. We've been working here and there, Sawamura answered for the whole team, like a good captain, clapping his hands. Okay, I know you lot are happy to see Wyan, but drills aren't over, and Hinata and Kageyama, just because you're friends here doesn't get you out of diving drills. She stifled a giggle as her 2 friends pouted, resuming jumping to the floor. Taking a seat, she looked to her side with little surprise as a silver-haired setter sat beside her. Congratulations, Sugawara offered, reaching for a yellow club-issued water bottle and drinking eagerly. Set scores? 8-2, singles, 6-2, 6-love, doubles, 4-6. I can't say I'm surprised, he admitted, watching the volleyball court with a blank stare, evidently far more focused on the conversation. Impeccable singles as always, and you've even got straight games, so why? I know. There was some special, inexplicable bond that game between sports players when they needed to work together, like a telepathic brand of communication, a silent understanding with the ability to carry out a conversation in half sentences and desperate yells, in or outside of the game itself. Sugawara sighed. I promised an explanation, didn't I? But in exchange, I want one thing. Wyan hummed in response. You've somehow befriended both Hinata and Kageyama and gotten them to coexist peacefully. He started. I'm sure you've noticed, somehow in your crazy genius way, that you're not the only one who doesn't play best in teams. I want you to help us help Kageyama, because maybe you'll help yourself too. It was nowhere near any request Hwan had expected, but it was one that touched her heart, and she nodded. "So, why you left Kageyama?" She wasn't letting Sugawara off the hook, though she was warming up to him again and remembering just how much of an anchor he had been for her. He gave a deep sigh, playing with a volleyball that had rolled between his legs. "We both know that I was the best male player at Kageyama, and that my tennis is one of the more reasons I'm an incredibly versatile player at Kurasuno. But why ditch something you're so good at?" Surprisingly, Sugawara laughed. "I guess this is the part no one really understands. I'd played tennis for 10 years at that point, and I realized at the end of my junior high school career that I didn't enjoy it. Actually, I kinda hated it." He gave an awkward chuckle, rubbing the back of his head with his eyes closed in a soft smile. "If you're the ace representing an entire school and dozens of teams, sometimes you want to do the things people don't want you to do." Clarity sharpened the world, and Hwan found herself suddenly understanding Sugawara better than she had in years. "But wait, if you hated playing, then the only reason you stayed at Kageyama was for you," he finished, ruffling her hair like he had when she was really just a kid 4 years ago. "You were one of the most talented players I'd seen in ages, and god damn it, if I wasn't going to stick around and help you, I would be a shitty third-year coach." She wanted to sob. All this time, when she had been acting like a brat, he hadn't quit just for the sake of it, but he had stayed just for her. "I'm sorry for shutting you out," she mumbled. "You were the best teacher I ever had." Sugawara laughed loudly. "Honestly, I don't think you have anything to be sorry for, but you didn't answer my earlier question." "Huh? Why do you do so well in singles, but play so poorly in doubles?" Hwan shook her head, tilting it backwards to stare at the light-speckled ceiling of the gym high above her head. "I think you know why. After that one experience that made me feel that I was never a good enough player for anyone to stick around for, I lost trust in playing. People talk high shit about technique and power, but what wins a doubles game is trust. Then, losing one set after another turned my awful playing even worse, with the feeling that I could never get better." Sighing, Sugawara pulled his knees up to his chest, thinking pensively. "You're sounding like I did in my last year at Kageyama. I was doing awful in singles, and you know I've always played best in doubles, but I couldn't help thinking, tennis is not a team sport, and you have no one to help you out. I don't know if you should stay with your team if you feel that way." Instead of reacting explosively like she knew he thought she would, Hwan laced her fingers together, twisting them around and around each other. "I feel like I can't just ditch them, though, can I?" Sugawara's response was simple. "Tennis isn't a team sport, because at the end of the day, you either have one person to help you or none. If you still love to play tennis, I do, then you should switch teams if it's affecting your performance. This isn't ditching. It's a way of forcing both you to get better and those other girls to stop relying on you." It was like a slap to the face, but in a good way. Suddenly, she knew exactly what she had to do. "Thanks, Suga," she said, using his nickname for the first time in a long while, pushing herself to her feet. "I'll hold up my end of the bargain then." He tilted his head to the side. "What? Hey, Kageyama, throw me a spike." Chapter 6. What the fuck? Kageyama replied instantly, frowning at the hair-colored-haired girl. You play tennis. You've never even played volleyball. Folding her arms, Hwaein retorted, You saw that I can serve just fine, so teach me how to spike. This is one of the worst ideas I think you've ever had. He deadpanned. And you're not exactly the master of good decisions. Pretending to be hurt, she rolled her eyes before suddenly lunging forwards and grabbing Kageyama's jacket lapels, pulling him down a little so she could look him in the eyes. Come on, please. Both of them found themselves blushing at the close proximity, but Hwaein refused to let go, staring with determination in her eye-colored eyes. Sighing exaggeratedly, the setter caved in. Fine, but if you suck, you're buying my milk for the next week. But if I don't, she retorted, smirking as she wheeled the cart of volleyballs over, you're buying me meat buns from Sakanoshita for a week. Deal? Deal. Hwaein threw the ball to Kageyama as though it was a netball, with a neat chest pass. He spun it in his hands as he considered how to teach her one of the hardest and most essential parts of volleyball in a few short minutes before they had to pack up. Finally, in his genius way, he had an idea. What part of tennis is closest to a spike? He asked the Kageyama champion, who propped her hands on her hips as she thought. I think it's the serve. It's a similar motion and follow-through, though in tennis we also have overheads, which are spikes at the net. However, a serve is the closest movement and the most used. Kageyama tossed the ball back to Hwaein, his constantly inexpressive face not budging from an impassive glance. Then, think about holding this ball in your hand like it's a racket, and when you're ready, pass it back. She focused on the feeling of the volleyball, a smooth, cold surface that was perfectly round and pleasant to the touch. With a flick of her fingertips, the blue and yellow ball landed back in Kageyama's hands, who immediately passed it along to Yachi, the first-year manager, with a request to throw it up for him. Run when you see where the ball is going to go, the black-haired boy instructed. A small step from your right foot, then bigger leaps before bringing both your feet together to jump as high as you can with your right arm behind you, like you're gonna do a tennis serve. Hwaein nodded, inching back to the middle of the court as the blonde girl tossed the ball upward. Kageyama bent his hands backwards at the wrists the slightest bit, giving an extraordinary soft brush of his fingers that somehow sent the ball spiraling far upwards. Run, now! He yelled, and the girl nodded, sprinting just as he had instructed, letting her arms fly behind her as the other spikers did. Hwaein took one final step forwards. When she was approaching the net, sticking her feet together and leaping upwards, her left hand positioned forwards to aim, she smashed her hand down, and the soft sound of a ball dropping to a hardwood floor with no force echoed through the gym as Hwaein glanced to her right, at the ball rolling away from her. Her fingers hadn't even brushed the ball. She stumbled and landed back on the floor, collapsing on her side to her knees. I told you so, Kageyama said without even a hint of sympathy. You owe me a week's worth of milk. Pushing herself upwards, the setter was surprised at the fierce determination in Hwaein's eye-colored eyes. You can't just give me one. Try again. Blinking, he inclined his head the slightest bit, turning to Yachi and bowing. Please keep throwing for us. Of course, the blonde girl stuttered, running back to the basket of balls, giving Hwaein a moment to analyze Kageyama as she had been asked to do. Evidently, He wasn't a total prick, because he was polite, and he was putting up with her absolute failure to spike a volleyball. Again, and again, and again. "Last ball," Yachi called at around 8:30 p.m. as she somewhat clumsily threw the volleyball to Kageyama, who pushed it upwards deftly. "Now, Wyan! Now, Wyan!" he yelled, and she almost didn't run from the surprise of him using her first name, but she pushed off a small step forward, a small step followed by 3 larger ones, before she pulled her feet together and sprung upward. For the first time, the ball was perfectly positioned before her open palm, and she smacked it downwards, feeling exhilaration flood every cell of her body as it bounced in the back corner of the court with a loud enough noise to make Yachi squeal. "Yes!" she cheered, landing awkwardly and stumbling forwards, latching onto Kageyama's shoulder so she didn't fall. Wyan blushed as she looked upwards, her hands not moving from where they'd slid down to his chest. "That was awesome! You're an amazing setter!" Kageyama gave a tiny chuckle, letting his hands rise up to rest on her shoulders. "You're an okay spiker." "Ow, shit!" She laughed, breaking away from him, but flashing a smile as she jogged to pick up the balls. "See? We can help each other." "Huh?" Kageyama stood alone on the court as she ran off to refill her water bottle, the blonde manager having left immediately after her last toss. Help each other? Something Daichi had said came back to him as he spun a ball in his palms off his hands, kicking the others into a corner. Volleyball isn't just about winning yourself or about working alone. That's why there are 6 players. All this time, he said quietly to himself. The girl who worked alone was trying to help me work in a team. The girl in question ran back onto the court, and without hesitation, Kageyama ran up to her, slamming his hand into the wall above her head and letting the volleyball in his arms drop loudly. She looked up at him with confusion and a little fear in her eyes. What are you doing? Chapter 7. What are you doing? Kageyama asked, his voice raising to a volume below a yell, but still loud. His arm resting on the wall above Wyan's head as he looked down at her, eyes narrowed. Her hands were inching toward his chest, though whether to push him away or grab his shirt to make him listen, he didn't know. I don't know what you mean, the tennis player answered with a slight tremble to her voice. Kageyama never acted impulsively in this way. That was Hinata's job, and he was so close, she was sure that he could hear her erratically racing heartbeat. You're helping me. Kageyama pushed backwards, so he was just standing in front of Wyan, one of his hands on his hips and the other dangling by his side. Why? She had to give an ironic laugh. Both of them were well aware she found nothing funny. Do you know why everyone knows me as the Kageyama singles champion? No, he answered, surprised by the question. The conversation had quickly veered in an unexpected direction, but he heard her out. Wyan slid down the wall to sit, her knees propped up in front of her with her arms draped around her shins as she stared at nothing. Kageyama joined her as she began to speak. I'm Kageyama's champion, not because I'm good or I win everything, she explained. I'm the singles champion because I don't play doubles well, because I can't seem to play well with anyone at Kageyama, and I have lost almost every single doubles match. The force of the words blew him a step backwards as he considered the implications he'd missed all along. She was just like him, just like him. It was laughably ridiculous. How hadn't he noticed it before? how her head had dropped when her 3 teammates left her behind the day he first met her, how she always played at Kageyama, performing serve after serve, and arrived at the volleyball gym up to an hour later than Yumi and her team. "Who told you to help me?" he asked softly. "Who knew that I needed it?" "Sugawara," Wyan admitted, "but please don't get mad or anything. Everyone needs a little help once in a while." She was right, and Kageyama knew it more honestly than he knew a lot of things, and he could not stop himself from brushing some of her hair-colored hair out of her eyes as he said, "Thank you." Wyan felt heat rise in her cheeks, forcing herself to lock her eye-colored eyes onto the blue ones so close to her. Kageyama's black hair hung messily around his head, slight drops of sweat gleaming on his light skin from the physical exertion of volleyball. His hand that held him up was propped behind Wyan, and he was, once again, so agonizingly close. Does he not know how attractive he is? Does he not know what personal space is? She combated a blush as she simply grinned, climbing to her feet with a "no problem." Kageyama found himself slightly disappointed as she walked away from him, ducking under the net to pick up the remaining balls. No, he would not. He couldn't just watch her walk away from him. Not the only person who he'd ever felt so close to, the only person who was the same. Kageyama ran after her, his shoes squeaking loudly on the clean floors of the gym, his large hand catching her wrist and spinning her around. What he hadn't planned for was Wyan being just a little uncoordinated. She spun a couple of times too many, ending up flying into his chest with a great deal of force, her hands unwittingly pushing him to the ground. His arms rose up to grab her to stop himself from tumbling to the floor, but they both ended up falling anyway. Kageyama hit the tiles on his back with a loud oof, Wyan landing on top of him, and the impact sending them both rolling until she somehow ended up underneath him, both his knees braced on either side of her body, and his hands planted on either side of her head, keeping him just above her. The space between them couldn't have been more than a couple of centimeters. So much closer than any time before. Each of them was panting from a mixture of exertion and shock, flushes rising in their cheeks, and yet some tiny part of Wyan found herself wishing that neither one of them would move. Not for a long, long time. Not ever. The word, the letter, was more than a little exhale. Her face was on fire, her heart beating so quickly she was surprised it didn't burst from her chest. Kageyama? He was also immensely flustered at the attractive tennis player who was right underneath him. Her hair-colored hair was messed from the previous minutes of excitement, her eye-colored eyes irresistibly wide and glimmering with 1,000 unreadable emotions. Though she didn't look like the most put-together person in the history of Japan, she was still Wyan, and that was pretty attractive to Kageyama. Wyan. Her name falling from his lips felt like a song, and her breath hitched, every fiber of her being extraordinarily aware of how close she was to him. My name is Tobio. I'll be watching your final, and I'll be cheering you on. The words came out bluntly, and they weren't exactly the most charming 3 sentences ever, but in some way they were perfect. Her teammates at Kageyama hadn't given her any well wishes, instead just saying something along the lines of, "You shouldn't spend so much time at Kageyama." Yet Kageyama had said something, and to her confusion and surprise and overwhelmingly general emotion, it made her want to kiss him. Chapter 8. Krasno, Kageyama, begin your match. Hwa-in tucked her hands together and placed them on her thighs, bowing over to the side of the net as the captain to Krasnow's captain. Nishinoya Yumi winked at her, both of them picking up their rackets and bowing to the referee. Normally, such a big fuss wasn't made out of tennis matches, especially not in a small town like Miyagi, but finals day was a big thing for any sport. Spectators had come from both schools and other affiliations at a neutral court outside the Sendai City Gymnasium. Unused to playing in front of so many people, Hwa-in flashed a nervous smile to the 3 girls on her team. "Look, we've beaten Krasno before, and we can do it again. Easy." Natsumi scoffed. "We don't need you to tell us that. You've been spending all your days with them. Anyways, no need to continue being a fake." What? She gaped at the blonde, who simply tossed her hair and motioned for Hayashi and Hashimoto to follow her to the other courts. With 4 courts available to play on, the 4 singles games would come first, then 2 doubles, then another 4 singles. As the first player in her team, Hwa-in would be playing on court 1, with Natsumi on court 2. No, she refused to think about the blonde girl, her doubles partner, someone she'd considered herself to be close to for years, but repressing the urge to cry in front of so many people, Hwa-in clenched her fist around her racket, stalking to the baseline on the opposite side of the court from Yumi, the ace of her team, 2 of the best players from 2 multifaceted powerhouse sports schools. And yet, Hwa-in was undoubtedly stronger, to everyone's knowledge. Kageyama knew this, leaning over the rail of the stands and watching her carefully, but she was different to yesterday's girl, who had lain on the floor underneath him with so many thoughts in her eyes. She looked like someone who was about to cry. She looked like someone who was about to lose. Standing beside Sugawara, the younger setter gritted his teeth, coming to a decision and cupping his hands around his mouth. "Hwa-in, fight!" Whipping her head around, the hair-colored-haired girl smiled at the boy who had cheered for her as he'd promised, waving her hand as Yumi accepted a ball, bouncing it in preparation for one of her notorious serves. The Krasno and Kageyama spectators alike quieted as the brunette tossed the ball up, slamming it in an ace of a serve. Hwa-in lunged for the ball, the ring of her racket just barely catching the serve she hadn't yet been prepared for, returning it too short for the surprised 3rd year to get it before it bounced twice. Smiling as the Kageyama students cheered, Hwa-in tilted her head to look at Kageyama. "Love, 15. Game, 6-3, Hwa-in Kageyama." Hwa-in bowed to Yumi as they shook hands over the net. The brunette had certainly given her a fight, but in the end she hadn't been a match for the insane mass of raw talent and technique that was Hwa-in. Glancing over to the scoreboard, the hair-colored-haired girl took in the other results of the singles game. 1, 6-3, 2, 6-4, 3, 6-4, 4, 5-7. 3 sets was a good start to a match, but now came the hard bit. After working with the Krasno girls and having those talks with Sugawara and Kageyama, she was ready to finally begin trusting her doubles partner. "I'm going to win this match," she swore to herself, jogging back from the bench and over to her water bottle to court 1. Some of that confidence faded when she realized who she had to trust. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, making Natsumi raise an eyebrow. "Sumi, I'm really sorry, not just for spending time at Krasno, but for never trusting you in doubles. Today, if it's your ball, it's your ball. I won't lose any points by chasing after something I can't get." Hwa-in waited for the blonde's response, but she just scoffed and turned away. Too little, too late. I don't know what you're trying to do here, but I won't let you trick me. A loud whistle blew, interrupting Hwayen's taken-aback response, which was probably for the better. Arguments before matches never ended well. Instead, she took the invitation to serve first, bouncing her ball to the ground and back up to her racket, remembering the feeling that had come with spiking in volleyball. When she was ready, she tossed the ball straight up, bringing her right arm and racket behind her in the same fluid motion as her left hand remained pointing at the sky. She jumped, dropping her left arm just in time to smash through the ball, immediately sinking into a ready position once she landed. The serve landed perfectly in the back corner of the service box, the Sawamura girl lunging for it but missing entirely. However, next point was when things began to go downhill. Another strong serve from Hwayen, but this time Yumi got it back, accidentally sending the ball straight to Natsumi in the volley position. "Yours!" Hwayen called, but Natsumi simply moved to the side, ignoring the ball and letting it drop to the ground, bouncing once, twice, 3 times. What? Hwayen felt her eyes beginning to fill with tears as she squeezed the grip of her racket, coming to the realization that people would never want to play with her. Another serve, another return. This time she was prepared for her partner to ignore the ball, so she sprinted forwards, but the ball was too far. Tripping with the effort, Hwayen felt herself fly down and forwards, still reaching for the ball with her racket, to touch it before it bounced. But she missed, and the sprint had been too much. Watching from the stands, Kageyama could not suppress his horror as Hwayen tumbled to the ground and rolled with the impact, leaving a smear of blood behind on the court. Chapter 9. "Hwayen!" Kageyama yelled, not caring that everyone else watching the match turned to stare at him as he sprinted down the stairs to the court, running to the side of the girl lying on the court with Sugawara close on his heels. She was on her side, her fingers loosely holding nothing, frozen in the position they had been before her racket flew from her hands. Her hands and legs were awkwardly splayed in every direction, and, from what he could see, Kageyama noticed scrapes along both sides of her body from the tumble and roll. Exchanging a glance with Sugawara, the two setters split the shorter silvered hair of the two going to talk to the ref and the taller one bending down to the court. Slipping an arm each under Wyan's legs and chest, Kageyama gently lifted her into the air, years of volleyball making him easily strong enough to do so. Her eyes were somewhere between open and closed, causing the boy to frown with concern as he laid her down on one of the benches, digging around in the cross-note tennis kits for a first aid kit. Yumi ran over frantically, trying to check if Wyan was okay. Kageyama noticed that the blonde Kageyama player hadn't done anything to check on her doubles partner. "Hey. Here." The third-year girl nudged Kageyama. "They're bringing on a reserve, so I have to get back to playing in a couple of minutes, but let me start cleaning her up." He gave her a confused glance. "You're good at first aid?" Rolling her eyes, the girl explained, "My brother is Nishinoya Yu, and he's the most reckless Libero I've ever met." And left it at that. As Yumi dabbed along the scrapes, Wyan's eyes fluttered fully open, wincing in pain as the disinfectant sunk into the blood-leaking wounds, leaving the antiseptic-soaked cotton pads covered in red. Surprising himself, Kageyama slipped his hand into Wyan's, kneeling so her horizontal head was now in line with his, letting her look at him in the eyes and squeeze his hand if the pain got to be too much. She cleared her throat, eyes filling with tears. "I tried, Tobio. I really tried." He also found himself nearing the point of tears at her heartbroken words. "I know, Wyan. I know, and that, whatever it wasn't your fault." The balls began hitting again, some reservee obviously playing in the Kageyama champion's place. Kageyama dug around the first aid kit, pulling out a couple of boxes of plaster and band-aids. "Are you patching me up?" Wyan teased weakly as he gently pulled her into a sitting position, leaning her back against the wall in front of the spectator stands. "Okay then, mother." He snorted, pressing a large square of plaster to one of the more serious scrapes and wrapping gauze around her leg to keep it in place, pressing a new band-aid to her elbow and some other, smaller wounds on her arms. Finally, all that was left were her hands and her face. "Hold still," Kageyama whispered, cupping her cheek with one hand ever so slightly, pressing a band-aid onto it with the other. Another tiny bandage on her temple, and Wyan was almost done. "Thank you." "Thank you." She squeezed his hand, though she winced as the ripped skin of her palm rubbed against his. "I'm gonna do everything I can for you," he promised, with a genuine seriousness to his voice as he hooked an arm around her waist, helping her to stand up so she could wash her hands to bandage them. "I mean it." He still hadn't told her the way he felt, the way he had ever felt since he first heard her call Love 15 at that fateful match at Krosno, the way he felt when she helped him more than anyone else had ever bothered to, the way he felt when she had just broken down in front of him, left behind by anybody she chanced to care about. They walked down a corridor together, Kageyama's hands still remaining at Wyan's waist, the cheers and sound of the tennis games slowly fading to a silence by the time they reached a bubbler. Wyan rinsed her hands off, presenting them back to Kageyama, who dabbed them dry with a disinfectant wipe and wrapped plaster and gauze around them. "There, you okay?" He finished, dropping her hands and zipping the first aid kit back up. "No." The word was tiny, but still impactful, enough that he literally dropped what was in his hands and turned back to her. "I tried working with them, to do what you said about working in a team." Honest tears were running down her cheeks, her eye-colored eyes puffy and red. "I tried so hard to do my best for everyone who expects me to. They just won't accept me. They just won't accept me." Hwayen's last sentence dragged off into a wail as she collapsed in Kageyama's arms, her head perfectly positioned on the 9 of his volleyball shirt that she cried into. His hands immediately came straight up to rub her back, letting her sob all that she needed to. "One day," he soothed quietly as her crying quieted, "one day you're going to find a team who won't leave you behind, and whatever you do with that team, you'll be better than I ever could be." She looked up, surprised at such words from a defending champion, but all he did was settle on a hesitant smile, cupping her cheek and brushing away her tears. She still hadn't told him the way she felt, the way she had felt ever since he first invited her when she was left behind, the way she felt when he cornered her against a wall, so close she knew he could hear her heartbeat, the way she felt when he had raised her up, letting her know he would never leave her behind. But she would tell him now, and just before she ran back out to the tennis courts to swap back in to play, Hwayen gave Kageyama's shirt a tug, pulling him down. "You can be on my team." She reached up to connect their lips. His hands instantly came to cup her face and neck, increasing the feeling of the kiss as she wrapped her arms around his shoulders, entirely lost in the moment. They separated a little short of breath, with hesitant smiles on their faces and a new feeling blossoming in their hearts. "I guess one way or another, you'll hear me say love again." Chapter 10. Hwayen walked back onto the court to cheer. From across Snow and Kageyama alike, she could see the volleyball club waving at her frantically, Tobio having rejoined their number and assuring them she was all right. A quick glance at the scoreboard told her that Krasno was tiring, Hwayen's team having taken the 2 double sets, leaving the remaining 4 singles games. "Miss Whalen?" The referee, a middle-aged man with kind smile wrinkles around the corners of his eyes, walked up to her. "Are you all right to play?" She considered her mummified hands, but then she looked to Kageyama's bench, where Natsumi looked rudely happy about her injured state. "I can't believe I ever fell for her fucking stupid friend act." In all honesty, the way the blonde girl had acted genuinely upset Hwayen, that she would have time to cry over that later, for now she gripped her racket, testing a swing, and relieved when the sting in her shredded palms was minimal. "I'll play," she responded, sending another cheer up from the stands. No matter what happened, she was still, undoubtedly, the best player at Kageyama, and this was the simple truth. And aces picked themselves back up. They led their school and team, regardless of what could happen to them in the process. She trotted over to court 3, meeting Sawamura and bowing to the girl. She had heard she was a lot like her older brother, Daiichi, kind, understanding, and preservant, and Hwayen had experienced this through their friendship firsthand. But on the tennis court, friendships or relationships were put away. It was just her and them, her and the ball. Hwayen bounced on her toes, catching the balls she was sent for her serve. A couple of drops followed by a perfect toss, and she was on her way, a serve spiraling into the box in front of Sawamura, who'd readjusted her position to return the ball neatly. Gritting her teeth, and yet smiling at the same time, the hair-colored-haired girl ran across the court, feeling the familiar ease and return to where she was at her best. Faintly, as the match dragged on, she could hear Krasno taking turns cheering for her and the second-year girl, Kageyama's distinct voice rising above them all to yell her name, and suddenly, the scrapes and pain didn't matter. It may have just been her and the ball, but she still knew Tobio was there too. A surreal kind of detached calm settled over Wyan as she glanced over at the scoreboard. Kageyama, Karasuno, 5-2, 40-15. Match point. And she felt as if she wasn't playing at all, as strange, emotionless, as she took in what she would need to win. Of course, winning the finals was a given, with the amount of sets they'd already scored, but it would be a total letdown if Wyan failed in her singles, disapproving herself as a worthy ace. She could feel exertion getting to her and was sure of one thing: if she did not take this game, she would lose the set. The motion of pushing the ball down, letting it bounce on the asphalt, and catching it as it flew back up into her hand was calming to her, and she repeated it a few more times before the harsh squeal of the umpire's whistled force to her toss of the yellow ball. She watched it spin, bending her knees and leaping, hitting the ball with the memory of Tobio's spiking instruction guiding her. However, Sawamura was truly credited as an amazing player, and had quickly adjusted to Wyan's powerhouse serves. The brunette sent the ball hurtling back down the backhand line on the left side of the court from Wyan's end. She reached it in a couple of leaps, flicking her racket upward so it spiraled with perfect spin all the way to Karasuno's disadvantage of the backhand side. Sawamura stumbled on her sprint, returning the ball short and high. Fuck. Wyan had planned on the other girl's return being just as strong as the previous 7 games, but apparently exhaustion mingled with clumsiness made for a weaker shot, one that she hadn't started running early enough for. Kageyama Tobio, with all his analytical genius, noticed this in seconds, and he cupped his hands around his mouth, giving a loud yell. Wyan, fight! The entire volleyball club picked up the chant, calling, Wyan, fight! Sawamura, fight! Smiling, the girl with the eye-colored eyes increased her speed, racing to the net and jumping upwards as though she were playing the sport she'd watched practice in the gym every night. With a smile, she brought her racket downwards, smashing the ball down into the court in the corner opposite that in which Sawamura was standing. The overhead was non-returnable, and the ball bounced once before flying straight into the fence. A moment of shocked silence followed, before screams and cheers encouraged both girls to smile and shake each other's hands with genuine happiness at the net. Running to their benches to await the outcomes of the next matches, but Tobio had never been one for patience. He ran from the stands, trailed by the volleyball club and a couple meters behind. Jumping onto the courts to meet Wyan, she dropped her racket, opening her arms and letting him embrace her, picking her up and twirling her around until he set her back down. You were amazing, he breathed. You cheered me on, she returned, not caring if she was sweaty and bleeding, because he was right there. You're my team, Tobio. He stared into her eyes with such love-filled intensity, the emotion was almost tangible. Fuck, I love you, Wyan. To both their surprise, they somehow ended up kissing in front of everyone, both schools letting out teasing wolf whistles until the students broke apart, remaining in each other's arms as Wyan hid herself in his black volleyball jacket. Wyan! Sugawara's excited scream pulled the girl from Tobio's embrace, and the silver-haired setter was quick to pull her into one of his own. Wyan, Kageyama won! Epilogue. Are you sure about this? Wyan took a moment to seriously consider her boyfriend's words, though it was the 4th time in the past 10 minutes he'd asked the question. Yes, Tobio, I'm sure. After spending that remainder of the term in classes at Kageyama, but still most of her time at Karasuno, There were a few decisions that seemed smarter, let alone better for all those involved. The first tennis season that year had definitely brought excitement into the first term of Hwayen's high school career, with forgiveness, antagonism, love, and everything in between. Many loose ends had been tied up since that fateful final between Kageyama and Karasuno, and Hwayen found herself filled with the satisfaction as she wrapped an arm around Tobio's waist as they sat next to each other in the grocery store sharing a milk carton. Natsumi and the rest of Hwayen's team had made their feelings towards her evidently clear, and whilst she wouldn't be able to forget being left behind on court so easily, she found moving on from the toxic group of girls she'd once called her friends to be one of the most painless decisions of her life. She and Suga shared a much healthier relationship, and he'd even taken her to the tennis courts near his house with the insistence that you won't get any better at tennis if you just ogle your boyfriend's settings all evening. The entire Karasuno volleyball club, in fact, was a second family, 11 brothers and one doting boyfriend who had turned out surprisingly more affectionate than anyone could have guessed. After 2 entire schools witnessed them kiss, Hwayen and Tobio had taken a few hours after the match to sit down and discuss their feelings in depth, discovering the definite bond that they shared through their similarity and help of each other. Suffice to say, the hair-colored-haired girl had been thanked many times for helping the setter play so well in a team. Trust was, after all, the most important thing in any sport. As for Kageyama itself, Hwayen had finally seen why Sugawara wanted to leave, and after a lengthy conversation with Nishinoya Yumi's tennis team, her parents, and far too many school officials, well, "Are you ready to go, Hwayen?" Tobio asked, holding open the door as they stood from the small table in Sakanoshita. Hwayen pulled her black jacket over her shoulders, feeling pride at the white words that read, Karasuno Tennis Club, Ace. I'm going wherever you go.